Is he part of the janitorial staff? Someone should tell him this is a closed training area. The voice, belonging to a young ranger candidate named Caden, was laced with the kind of casual arrogance that only comes from being 22 years old and physically perfect. His friend, another hopeful named Diaz, snorted a laugh. They were standing in the cavernous staging area of Fort Bragg's most advanced close-quarters battle facility, a place the operator simply called the Shoot House. It smelled of concrete dust, spent brass, and nervous sweat. They were part of a class of 20 elite soldiers, all vying for a handful of slots in the Army's most secretive Tier 1 unit. Today was supposed to be their final evaluation, a complex hostage rescue scenario, and sitting on a simple wooden bench against the far wall was an old man. He wasn't just old by military standards, he was old by any standard. His hair was a shock of silver white, thin on top. His face was a roadmap of deep lines, especially around his eyes, which seemed to hold a permanent squint, as if he'd spent a lifetime staring into a harsh sun. He wore a set of faded olive-drab fatigues that looked like they'd been issued during the Carter administration. They were clean but worn thin at the knees and elbows. On his feet were a pair of scuffed, ancient-looking leather boots. He was quietly sipping from a dented metal thermos, his posture relaxed but not slumped. There was a stillness about him, a complete lack of wasted motion that was jarring in a room filled with the nervous energy of young alpha males. "Seriously," Caden muttered, adjusting the high-tech multi-cam plate carrier on his chest. His own gear was brand new, a symphony of polymer, Velcro, and advanced alloys. "Look at him. He's got to be 70. What's he doing here?" Across the room, Sergeant Major Croft, the lead instructor for the selection course, heard the comment. Croft was a man carved from granite and institutional knowledge, with a gaze that could peel paint. He looked over at the candidates, then at the old man, and a flicker of something, amusement perhaps, or profound respect, crossed his face before vanishing. He walked toward the group, his boots making no sound on the gritty floor. "Eyes front, ladies." Croft's voice was a low growl that cut through the chatter. The 20 candidates snapped to attention. "You think you're here to impress me today? You are mistaken. Your audience is elsewhere." He nodded almost imperceptibly toward the old man, who hadn't moved a muscle. He just continued to watch them, his eyes calm and patient. Caden and Diaz exchanged a confused look. This was a joke, right? Some kind of mind game? They were the tip of the spear, the best the Ranger Regiment and Special Forces had to offer. They were here to be tested by the best instructors in the world, not to be observed by some relic who looked like he belonged in a VFW hall, telling war stories over cheap beer. The old man finished his drink, screwed the cap back on the thermos with a quiet, metallic scrape, and placed it carefully on the bench beside him. Then, he stood up. The movement was fluid, economical, and utterly silent. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'10", and had a lean, wiry frame that the loose fatigues concealed. But as he stood, the geometry of his posture was perfect. His shoulders were back, his weight was centered, and his head was level. It wasn't the rigid posture of a parade ground soldier, but the predatory balance of a lifelong fighter. He walked over to a rack of training weapons, the blue-barreled rifles used for force-on-force drills. The candidates watched, a mixture of pity and contempt on their faces. They were all equipped with state-of-the-art M4s, tricked out with expensive optics, lasers, and grips. The old man picked up the plainest rifle on the rack, a simple, unadorned M4 with iron sights. No red dot, no foregrip, nothing. He checked the action with a practiced efficiency that was startling to watch. The series of clicks and snaps was a single coherent sound. He worked the charging handle, checked the chamber, and slapped the magazine into the well, not with a show of force, but with a quiet, precise motion of his palm. His hands, Caden noticed, were covered in a lattice of pale, thin scars, and his knuckles were thick and calloused. They were not the hands of a janitor. "All right, listen up," Croft announced, his voice pulling their attention away from the strange spectacle. "Change of plans for the final eval. Standard hostage rescue scenario is scrubbed." A murmur went through the group. They had drilled for this for weeks. "Today you have a simpler objective," Croft continued, a grim smile touching his lips. "You, all 20 of you, will form one assault team. Your mission is to enter the shoot house, locate and neutralize the opposing force. The OPFOR consists of one man." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Kaiden almost laughed out loud. One man against 20 of them? This was an insult. "Sergeant Major, who is the OPFOR?" he asked, his tone bordering on insolent. Croft's eyes narrowed. He simply jerked his thumb toward the old man, who was now methodically stretching his neck, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for a light jog. "Meet your opposition. You have full authorization to use extreme prejudice. The exercise begins in 5 minutes. Go." The room erupted in disbelieving whispers. Diaz leaned over to Kaiden. "They're messing with us. This is a psych out. The real OPFOR is probably already inside, a full team of instructors." "Has to be," Kaiden agreed, but he couldn't take his eyes off the old man. The man was now doing a final check, not of his weapon, but of the room itself. His eyes weren't just looking, they were scanning. He noted the doorways, the angles of the ceiling, the placement of the overhead lights. He glanced at the assembled candidates, but his gaze wasn't personal. He seemed to be counting them, assessing their formations, their gear, their postures. It was the detached, analytical gaze of a wolf sizing up a herd of elk. A faint, almost sad smile touched the old man's lips. It wasn't a smile of mockery. It was a smile of recognition, as if he'd seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. Then, without a word to anyone, he turned and walked through the door into the shoot house, disappearing into the darkness within. The door clicked shut behind him, a sound of finality. 5 minutes, Croft repeated, looking at his watch. The candidates, now buzzing with a mix of confusion and indignation, huddled up. Kaiden, as the informal leader, took charge. "Okay, look, this is obviously a trick. Standard stack. Diaz, you and Sanchez on point. We go dynamic. Flashbangs in every room. We move fast, we dominate. Whatever the real test is, we pass it by being aggressive and sticking to the book. Don't worry about the old-timer. He's just a distraction. Let's move." They stacked up by the door, a 20-man column of raw, controlled power. They were a terrifying sight. Helmets, night vision mounts, weapons bristling with technology. They were the future of warfare. They were about to go up against a ghost from its past. In the control room, a darkened space filled with monitors showing dozens of camera angles from inside the house, Sergeant Major Croft stood beside a civilian technician. The tech was fidgeting nervously. "SGM Croft, are you sure about this?" the tech asked, gesturing to the main screen which showed the 20-man team stacked on the door. 20 of them? Against Mr. Peters? I mean, the liability... Croft didn't take his eyes off the monitor. He had a small, almost reverent smile on his face. "Son, the only liability in this building right now is the overconfidence of those 20 young men. Mr. Peters was clearing rooms like this before their parents were born. Just run the clock, and for God's sake, make sure the recording system is fully operational. They're going to want to watch this later, probably a few hundred times." On the screen, a camera in the first hallway showed nothing but shadows. Mr. Peters was nowhere to be seen. He had simply been swallowed by the architecture. "Breach, breach, breach!" Kaiden's voice was crisp over the comms. The door flew open with a percussive crack. A flashbang grenade sailed into the first room, a small square office, and detonated with a blinding flash and a deafening boom. The first 4-man team poured in, weapons up, sweeping their sectors in a perfect, well-rehearsed dance of violence. The room was empty. "Clear!" They moved to the next room, a long hallway. Another flashbang, another flawless entry, another empty space. They were moving fast, a well-oiled machine. Kaiden, in the middle of the stack, felt a surge of pride. They were textbook. Perfect. "This is a waste of time," Diaz hissed over the private comm channel. "He's probably hiding in a closet at the end." They cleared 2 more rooms the same way, empty. The building was eerily silent, the only sounds their own breathing and the scuff of their boots. They were now deep inside the first floor, bunched up in a central corridor with multiple doors leading off it. It was a classic fatal funnel. They knew it, but their own numbers gave them a false sense of security. 20 guns could cover every angle. "Hold," Kaiden ordered, sensing something was wrong. The silence was too deep. "Where is he?" And that's when the lights went out, not just in their hallway, but the entire building. A total plunging darkness, so complete it was disorienting. The only light came from the faint green glow of their night vision goggles, which bloomed for a second as they adjusted. "Power's cut!" someone shouted. "He's at the breaker box!" "No," Caden said, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. The breaker box was near the entrance behind them. "He let us pass it. He's been behind us this whole time." Before the words had fully left his mouth, chaos erupted. It didn't start with a gunshot. It started with a sound from the ceiling, a soft scrape, and then the heavy fire extinguisher from the wall mount in the hallway they had just cleared dropped into their midst. It landed with a deafening clang, not as a weapon, but as a distraction. Every operator trained to react to the immediate threat flinched and glanced toward the sound. In that half-second of shared distraction, he struck. From a doorway they had already cleared and left unguarded, Mr. Peters emerged. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a wraith, a blur of motion. He didn't fire his rifle. He used it as a lever. The first man, Sanchez, went down as the butt of the old man's rifle hooked his ankle, pulling his feet out from under him. As Sanchez fell, Peters was already moving, stepping over him. He drove the muzzle of his rifle into the solar plexus of the man behind Sanchez, who folded with a choked gasp. 2 down, no shots fired. He flowed through their formation like water. The candidates, bunched up and disoriented in the dark, were a liability to each other. Their fields of fire were masked. They couldn't shoot without hitting their own men. He had no such problem. They were the target. A third candidate tried to bring his rifle to bear, but Peters was too close inside his arc. The old man's left hand shot out, not grabbing the rifle but pushing it skyward, while his right hand, holding his own weapon by the pistol grip, slammed the side of the M4 into the candidate's helmet. The sickening crack echoed in the hall. The candidate crumpled. 3. Caden, seeing the carnage unfold in grainy green night vision, tried to shout orders, but his throat was dry. It was happening too fast. This wasn't a firefight. It was a harvest. Peters moved with a brutal balletic grace. He wasn't using brute strength. He was using leverage, momentum, and an intimate, terrifying knowledge of the human body's breaking points. He'd use his rifle to trip one man into another, creating a domino effect. He'd shove a muzzle under an armpit to disrupt a man's balance and spin him into a wall. His feet were never still, but never clumsy. He moved in triangles, always taking an angle, never staying in one place for more than a second. Diaz finally got his weapon oriented and fired a burst. The blue training round zipped past Peters, who was no longer there. He had used the muzzle flash to pinpoint Diaz's position. He lunged forward under the rifle fire and drove his shoulder into Diaz's chest, slamming him back against the wall. Before Diaz could recover, Peters' hand snaked out and pressed the sensor on Diaz's chest plate. A high-pitched beep confirmed the kill. 4. The candidates were panicking now. They were firing blindly into the dark, their muzzle discipline gone. Their high-tech gear was useless. In the close-in, churning brawl, it was all about instinct and reaction time, and his were on a different plane of existence. He spun, and his rifle barrel caught a candidate's weapon, yanking it from his grasp. As the man stared at his empty hands in shock, Peters tapped him twice on the chest with his own muzzle. Beep, beep. 5. He kicked the discarded rifle down the hall, creating another sound distraction. 2 more candidates turned toward it. He engaged them from their blind spot. Beep, beep, 7. Caden saw an opening. The old man was momentarily tangled with another soldier. Caden raised his rifle, the laser sight painting a red dot on the back of the faded fatigue jacket. He squeezed the trigger. Click. His weapon had jammed. A stovepipe, a simple malfunction, but in that moment, it was a death sentence. The old man heard the click. He turned his head, and for a fraction of a second, his eyes met Caden's through the darkness and the green haze of the NVGs. The sad smile was back. It said, "You're not the first." He disengaged from the man he was fighting, shoving him into Caden's path, and moved toward him. Caden, fumbling with his rifle, trying to clear the jam, took a step back. He bumped into the soldier Peters had just thrown at him. They were a tangled mess. Peters didn't rush. He walked forward calmly, raised his simple iron-sighted rifle, and Caden saw the dark, unforgiving circle of the muzzle aimed right at his chest. Beep! Caden looked down at his own vest. A steady red light was glowing. He was dead. And so were the 2 men next to him, tagged in the second before he was. 10. The rest was a blur of methodical, terrifying efficiency. The remaining soldiers, scattered and broken, were hunted down. He used the architecture against them, appearing in doorways they thought were clear, dropping from ledges they didn't know existed. He didn't run. He simply flowed from one point of violence to the next. The beeps from the training vests became a rhythmic funereal chorus. In the control room, the tech stared at the main monitor, his mouth hanging open. Croft had his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. On the screen, the final red light on the last candidate's vest lit up. The hallway was a tangle of bodies, groaning men, and discarded equipment. Standing in the middle of it all, perfectly calm, was Mr. Peters. His breathing was even. He hadn't even broken a sweat. Croft keyed his microphone. His voice boomed into the silent house. Time. The tech looked at the clock. Sergeant Major, that was 45 seconds. From first contact to final neutralization, 45 seconds. Croft nodded slowly. Get the house lights back on and tell the medics to stand by for bruised egos. Back in the hallway, the lights flickered on, painfully bright. 20 of the nation's most promising soldiers were scattered across the floor like discarded toys. They were groaning, checking themselves for injuries, but mostly they were staring in stunned, humiliated silence at the old man. He wasn't looking at them. He was walking the corridor, picking up the flashbang canisters and spent magazines. He was tidying up, as if he were, in fact, the janitor. The walk back to the briefing room was the longest walk of their lives. They shuffled in, their high-tech gear feeling like a clown costume. They avoided eye contact with each other. The shame was a physical weight. They took their seats. SGM Croft stood at the front of the room, silent. A moment later, Mr. Peters walked in, his old rifle slung over his shoulder, and went back to his bench, where he retrieved his thermos and poured himself another cup. Croft let the silence stretch for a full minute. Report, he said, his voice quiet. No one spoke. Caden, Croft said, you were team lead. Give me the AAR. What happened? Caden stood up. His face was pale. He looked at Croft, then at the old man on the bench. We underestimated the enemy, Sergeant Major. You don't say, Croft said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Elaborate. What was your plan? We planned to move fast, dynamic entry. Overwhelm with speed and violence. And what did OPFOR do? He used our own tactics against us, Sergeant Major, Caden said, his voice cracking slightly. He used the environment. He used the dark. He used our arrogance. He let us bunch up. He created a distraction and attacked when our focus was broken. He was everywhere at once. Croft walked over to the large monitor and pressed a button. The footage from the hallway camera appeared on screen, a top-down view of the entire engagement. He played it in slow motion. The room was utterly silent as they watched the ghost-like figure of Mr. Peters dismantle their entire team with the cold precision of a mathematician solving an equation. They saw every mistake they made, magnified. They saw how he used one man's body as a shield to engage another. They saw how he never wasted a single step. That, Croft said, pointing to the screen, is what a Tier 1 operator looks like. Not the gear, not the muscles, not the attitude. That. Economy of motion. Absolute situational awareness, the ability to turn your opponent's strength into his greatest weakness. You had numbers. He used them to create chaos. You had technology. He used it to blind you. You had a plan. He had a goal. He turned off the monitor and faced them. You all want to join the most elite unit in the world. You think it's about being the fastest, the strongest, the best shot. It's not. It's about being the smartest. It's about humility. It's about understanding that there is always, always someone better. And the day you forget that is the day you die. He gestured toward the old man. This is Command Sergeant Major Jedediah Peters, retired. He was one of the first 5 men selected for the unit you're trying to join, back in 1977. He wrote half the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, in the book you all studied to get here. He designed this very shoot house based on his experiences in Mogadishu, Panama, and a dozen other places the history books will never mention. He is not the janitor. He is the standard, and today you all failed to meet it. A wave of profound shock and awe washed over the candidates. They stared at the old man, Jed Peters, who was just quietly sipping his drink, looking at them with those same patient, tired eyes. After a long moment, Caden cleared his throat. He turned away from Croft and faced Peters directly. He stood ramrod straight. "Sergeant Major Peters," he said, his voice clear and steady now, all the arrogance gone, replaced by a deep and genuine humility. "On behalf of all of us, I apologize for our disrespect. We were arrogant and foolish. It was an honor to be so thoroughly defeated by you, sir." One by one, the other 19 candidates stood up, echoing Caden's sentiment. Jed Peters slowly lowered his thermos. He looked at the 20 young, humbled faces. The sad smile was gone. In its place was a look of faint approval. He stood up, his joints popping softly, and walked to the front of the room. "Sit down," he said. His voice was raspy, quiet, but it commanded the room completely. They sat. "Your first mistake wasn't underestimating me," Jed began, picking up a whiteboard marker. "Your first mistake was overestimating yourselves. You relied on your gear and your plan. A plan never survives contact with the enemy. You have to become the plan." He began to draw on the whiteboard, sketching the layout of the hallway. "You stacked 20 men in a 10-foot wide corridor. You weren't a strike team. You were a traffic jam. You were a target." For the next 2 hours, Jed Peters took them back through the 45-second engagement, second by second. He explained why he dropped the fire extinguisher. He explained how he used the sound of the jam in Caden's rifle to time his final move. He broke down their footwork, their communication, their fatal lack of patience. He wasn't yelling, he was teaching. He was passing on the brutal lessons he had learned over a lifetime of real violence, lessons paid for in blood and sacrifice. The young soldiers listened, their faces rapt with attention. They were no longer arrogant candidates. They were students, sitting at the feet of a master. They had come to the shoot house to prove they were wolves. Instead, they had met a dragon, and in the ashes of their pride, they finally began to learn what it truly meant to be a warrior.